Good morning, everyone. I'm Daniel Moore, Vice President Administrative Services here at Fresno City College. I have two other co-presenters today. I'll give them a moment to introduce themselves.
Sure. I'm Lisa Getchy. I'm the Vice President of Instruction. And Kirsten.
I'm Kristen Kahn. I'm a communication arts instructor and the program review coordinator at Fresno City.
So this morning we're going to go through a presentation that's going to feature the planning process here at Fresno City College. As seen in the title slide, we're going to cover some of the components of the annual unit planning, resource requests, and human resource requests functions. So
Daniel,
to get us
we're not
going,
seeing your screen. You're not sharing.
okay.
Perfect.
Now, all right. So, yes, we're going to go over to annual unit planning, resource requests, and human resource request functions in this presentation. And to get us going, I'm going to pass the virtual microphone to VP Getchy. Lisa.
Great, thank you. Good morning. So first of all, we want to share that this information lives on the College Council SharePoint. And I wanted to give a little bit of background about, how we came to be here today and where this lives. So first of all, shout out to Carol Rains Heisdorf. Many of you know her out of our IR office and partially retired, but she did a lot of the legwork on putting this presentation together. I guess historically, going way back, when neither Daniel or I were here, this was a shared presentation that was done every spring. And so it's been handed off to us. And unfortunately, Carol can't be here today. So she's left it in our charge. So I wanted to first give credit where credit is due for all the work that she has done to get us where we are now. And also a little bit of a disclaimer that, in our current roles, Kirsten coming back to program review and Daniel and I both being within a year of being here, haven't been through this entire cycle. So bear with us, a little grace, but we want to make sure that we are starting this off and making sure that you know what information is available as well as where to find this information and kind of why it's set up this way. So here's where you'll find it when all is said and done. And Daniel, then if you can move on to our next slide. And we want to make sure that that we are connecting our resource allocation and our resource allocation processes to our SCCCD standards, as well as to our program review, which is really Kirsten's critical role in this equation. She is a faculty member, but she sits in a very important space in terms of making sure that our kind of big picture plans and goals connect to how we use our funds. So this slide, and then I'm going to kind of turn it over to Kirsten after this to whittle it down a little bit more for us. But what SCCCD expects, and that is our accrediting body, of course, is that we have a plan. We have a way to do this that connects the big picture, that connects our mission, our plans, our goals with our actual resource allocation process. So really connected here, particularly to standard 1, where you see our mission in there, and standard 3. These are SCCCD standards. And then when we kind of move it forward from there, we want to connect it internally to our program review to make sure that as instructional programs and areas on campus and also student services areas on campus connect the dots between what their own programs are doing and how we allocate and think about our resources. So with that, Daniel, if you'll go ahead and forward it, and I'll turn it over to Kirsten.
So on that previous slide, you saw both standards from SCCCD that really kind of get at why we've developed these processes at our institution. And so in terms of program review, we're looking at every 4 years, you taking the time to think about what data you have to better understand what's happening in your areas, to reflect on that data, and to think about how that information is helping you to serve the mission of the college. So standard 1 was connected to the mission and how we connect all of the things that we do in terms of the overall mission. And so that's really the basis, the foundation for program review. So program review is designed to create this space for you to think about your data, think about how that data helps you to determine your service or your role in the college's overall achievement of the mission. And then as a part of program review, you are also taking the time to plan. So you're saying, okay, here's what's happening in my area. Here is where we'd like to see our area go. Here's the direction we'd like to see it grow. Here are the outside forces that are influencing our area that we need to adapt and respond to. And then the last section of program review is your opportunity to determine what things you need, what resources you need from the college in order to help you achieve those goals. And so again, program review becomes like the foundation of all of this. And then as a result of doing all of that work, you establish your goals and you have your annual unit plans, and your resource requests stem from the goals that you've identified in those annual unit plans. And so the value of this training is really intended to get at helping us to see the connection between the goals that we establish in program review and how those serve us over the next 4 years, so that the college can be strategic in terms of how we're using our resources to ensure that we are doing all of the things that we need to do to meet the mission. And so this slide really identifies that everything is really the mission is the focus. So we have all of our college goals and our plans, and those feed into program review, like I just said, and then program review feeds into resource prioritization and allocation. And then we determine how effective we are, and we start that whole process again. So we often refer to it as like our integrated planning process, right? We're thinking about the resources that we have, how those resources have influenced our students, and then what we need to do different moving forward. And it's just cyclical. And so the entire session today is really kind of grounded in helping you understand that big picture, but more importantly, helping you to see what are the specific things that you need to do, like how you can fill out the forms to ensure that you are able to advocate for your areas. I think thank you. Lisa, are you doing this one?
No, I'm up now. Thank you,
Okay.
Kirsten. And I'll just dovetail off of Kirsten's comment on the previous slide. And as you're seeing here, this is an overview on the kind of annual timeline associated with the unit plan and resource requests. Each year in September, areas review their data and evidence that help inform, some of the updates or revisions to their unit plan. Then as applicable, areas then meet with relevant pathway team members, advisory groups, students, colleagues to collaborate on the said unit plan. Then in the month of October, again, as applicable, submissions of the unit plan and resource requests would go to the area supervisors, ideally by the first Monday of October. That then rolls into November, where the applicable vice president would then submit the resource request to my office, the Vice President of Administrative Services, by the first Monday of November. Then, subsequent to that submission in November, leading into the top of the next calendar year in January, the resource committee then does a ranking. Where resource request recommendations are then provided to College Council, ideally in February, that reviews, and then following appropriate discussions at that forum, submissions are then recommended to the president of Fresno City College. That then rolls into the month of March, where the president ultimately provides approval and allocation for areas to get guidance on implementations as applicable for said resource. So going to this slide, a natural question is, well, what do we need to be factoring in our resource requests? So what we did here, and again, as Lisa mentioned upstream, hats off to Carol, who really did a great job getting to a level of granularity with these rubrics. And I want to focus on kind of like the three core ones. Specifically, the first is program and service unit review, where the two core criterias would be, the first one is the request clearly linked to the program review or service unit review. Second criteria in this section, does the rationale for the request clearly describe how the resource will impact the overall vitality of the program? Under institutional alignment, the first criteria would be, does the request clearly align with the college mission, vision, college strategic plan, or other college-wide initiatives? Additionally, in this section, does the requested resource have the potential for impact beyond the requesting area? Last, under the section of evaluation of resource, does the area request identify a clear plan to determine the impact of the resource allocation? And then the second criteria here, does the area indicate a timeline, relevant evaluation method, baseline measurement, and/or other relevant information to determine impact? And some of the subsequent slides will get into a little more granularity with these components, but submissions based off of a none, low, moderate, and strong would serve as the basis for evaluation by the committee with submitted requests. Now to drill down a little bit further, we're highlighting here the annual unit plan form. First, we kind of did a capture here under the light green section entitled Resource Needs, which is a very important element. As you can see, some of the fields here speak to, if resources needed, select what type of funding, right next to what the estimate of probable cost would be for said resource. Additionally, and I just want to highlight the two boxes there, is it an ongoing or one-time cost? Why is that important? For a set resource request, and we will give examples in subsequent slides, if it's a one-time funding request, that would be one level of consideration. However, if it is an ongoing cost, that is another facet of consideration, because it will not just be for, the immediate fiscal year. These are considerations for funding that will have to be encompassed for many years going forward, dependent on the service, product, or resource request in general. On this next slide, now we get the pop-up. We want to bring attention to listing the strategic goals alignment. And this goes back to some of the criterions that were specified in the rubric on the previous slide. Here is where you'd get into detail again about, is the request clearly linked to the program review, service unit review? Does the rationale for the request clearly describe how the resource will impact the overall vitality of the program? Then in this area as well, this is where the institutional alignment comes into play with, the criterions featured about clear alignment to college mission, vision, and college strategic plan or initiatives, and the requested resource having the potential to impact beyond the requesting area. Then in this section here, I know this slide's getting a little busy, but we're trying to just show how it builds. You see we have an arrow towards timeline for completion, which does factor into what we reviewed for the evaluation of resource, including, and this touches on the plan, and as you can see here, expected outcome and measurement of success for unit goal. And that way you see for each unit goal, how these items build for a complete submission for resource committee review. So what types of resources requests typically come forward? We have a few examples here that fall under equipment that I'll briefly touch on. The first one is an example of a welding request for a Walter Surfux machine at a approximate $9,835 cost. with a brief bullet to specify what the view is for this resource. In this case, use the properly cleaned stainless steel before welding. Another example here is a request for music, and specifically a commercial music equipment upgrade. Higher price tag, in this case, at about $20,272. And a bullet summary, it would be audio equipment that would provide better and more extensive techniques for recording situations and live sound reinforcement. Again, you're seeing the theme with type, specificity, cost, brief summary of use. And this third example here for biology models, in this case, $5,342, with the summary being the diversification of our model collection will support an inclusive learning environment, allow for the representation of different student bodies, and enhance their self-representation identification. So this next slide is an overview of the resource request form. We're going to touch on some of these fields with some graphics, but here at the top, the responsible person submitting and their email, the area supervisor. And as we get going with some of the graphics, the area submitting, resource request title, as we featured in the previous slide, related annual unit goal, mission, vision, and one or more specific strategic goals. And again, in this area here, we're bringing in, back to that rubric, the institutional alignment criteria that is given as guidance to follow that can be expanded upon in this section for review at the appropriate juncture. Then blowing up this box here with the timeline specific, going back again to the criterion, to specify for each component as applicable, what in fact would be the timeline to completion, again, if it is applicable, whether it's an ongoing cost or one-time cost for this resource submission. And just refreshing the page, there's some other information here, which we'll get into on some of the subsequent slides, that depending on the type of resource request, there might be a supplemental form required, specifically a facilities modification form or a completed technology request form, which we will get into in subsequent slides. And again, just showing a quick highlight here, some folks here with an example of responsible person, supervisor, contact information, and some of example fields for this particular request, in this case for FPCA. And again, an example of what can be submitted for the mission, vision, and one or more of the strategic goals. Here, and I'll highlight, the college is committed to intentional resource allocation for human, financial, physical, and technological resources that provide support for students and eliminating racial equity gaps, with a few bullets here to give a bit more granularity to make a compelling case. And what I just want to emphasize here, this is the opportunity to really bang the drum and really highlight, feature, and make a compelling case for what would positively differentiate the given resource request from others. And again, keeping in mind the resource committee reviewing this, absent of the ability to talk to the responsible person, this is the area that submitters are highly recommended and encouraged to really make a compelling case to sell on your resource request submission. And again, this is just examples of additional granularity can be provided in this case, and I'll just highlight upgrading equipment for all students in Fresno City College's music program promotes equity by ensuring that every student, regardless of their financial background, has access to high quality tools for learning and creativity. This levels the playing field, allowing everyone to develop their skills without being limited by outdated or inadequate resources. And again, just showing in this case, multiple resources were submitted that align to the previous information. While no timelines for completion were provided, hence NA, costs were provided. And you see in parentheses to attach quotes so that the committee could in fact reference said quotes against what's represented and the contextual information for review. And again, we're going to get into subsequent slides. As applicable, some additional forms might be needed. And I will now get into the facilities modification request. So this is a request that typically runs through the Administrative Services Department for modifications to existing facilities as applicable for some functions such as remodeling, additions, rehabilitation, changes to the usage of existing facilities, new equipment connections, and any proposed changes that may affect electrical, data, plumbing, HVAC, existing equipment, or buildings. We have a highlight here of where they can be found on SharePoint under construction services. And this supplemental form is so important above and beyond the form showed on the previous slide, because some of the granularity associated with some of these components heavily factor into an analysis by the district's office construction services team to vet, see about feasibility, viability, an estimate of probable cost for said function or said request, so that the initial due diligence is conducted and serves as a complement to the previous data points that we covered, so that if the resource committee deems that the request that required the facilities modification should in fact go forward, time is not unnecessarily lost with required due diligence, so that the committee can have full faith and confidence that if approved based off of what's been presented, it can go forward, assuming college council and the college president agrees as well. So the facility modification request form does a great job in vetting out any other considerations, so that again, that key due diligence point can be covered.
Jump in here for a second, Daniel. I just
Sure.
wanted to, if you wouldn't mind going back just so I don't lose my train of thought. I just want to share a couple of things that, again, not knowing the full scope of who we have on today, that wanted to point out that most often these are going to come through your deans. And so the deans have worked on this, but it's a good conversation to have in making sure that if you are not a dean, and you have been talking to your dean or area supervisor about what this looks like, that is a project that typically they submit. Most of these requests do filter through our deans, but there's another point I wanted to make, and that is because I know this facilities modification can be a little confusing if you do not mentally separate out any bond measure types of activities. That's not included in what we're talking about here. And there are also many grant funded things that you're not going to see in this process as well, because we're following the specific and exact deliverables of that grant. So that is not necessarily covered in that process. Just a little disclaimer. So go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you, Lisa. Very similar to the facility modification request that we talked about on the previous slide, we're showing a screenshot of the technology request form complement, if you will, that has an online interface, which can be accessed through this link right here that's on the screen, where a requester can go in, select the new that we have highlighted in red, to request a service or product is applicable. that takes you to a sub-screen, as you're seeing is highlighted in yellow here for technology requests, that would walk you through the specific data points our technology support services team would need from their side to best evaluate what the request is. So again, when you talk about IT, some of the due diligence points that might not immediately be evidenced in the resource request submission from a total cost of ownership perspective can be adhered to. For example, sometimes whether we're talking about technology-centric hardware or software, sometimes from a total cost of ownership or TCO perspective, licenses are needed for, said requests. And these licenses might be good for 1 year, might be good for multiple years, or might be able to be dovetailed into a different provision that the college might have that might need to be integrated or factored into overall college operational considerations. These are items similar to the previous form. It's neither fair or reasonable for this level of granularity and expertise to be immediately known to some submitters. Some might have more experience, as Lisa mentioned earlier, their deans and whatnot, but even some requesters who have been through this process before might not be immediately aware of some other factors that might be requisite for said request to go forward. That is why we feature, as in the previous slide, facility modification requests, and in this slide, a technology request form, so we can ensure we do a quality due diligence effort inclusive of the resident subject matter experts to make sure applicable resource requests have went through the proper channels so they can be featured appropriately for resource committee consideration. And now I'm going to segue to Lisa to take us through the subsequent slides. Lisa?
All right. So again, part of this packet, so this is a big lift, right? To take all of this information and make sure that the Resource Allocation Committee has all of the information that they need. And one of the tricky things, I'll be very transparent in saying this, that, costs change. We're doing this so far in advance, but we still have to give the Resource Allocation Committee the best estimate that we possibly can about what kind of costs are we talking about. So this is submitted with a justification memo, kind of simple, and you can go ahead and move forward, Daniel. There you go. Does the rationale for the request clearly describe how the resource will impact the overall vitality of the program? So again, that connecting back to program review, connecting back to program quality and our educational master plan is kind of built into this. And I know that that this training was done with our deans earlier in the year, and the resources requests this time around were much more did a far better job and improved job of really speaking to that and making sure that we're starting to connect and continuing our goal of connecting program review to our rationales and justifications for why we fund what we fund. Thank you. Go ahead. And does the request or resource have the potential to impact beyond the requesting area? Good and bad, right? Some areas, that might be accessed by one of our programs might be positively affected, but we also want to be cognizant of, are we impacting other areas or even kind of, we don't want to be duplicative either in our allocations for resources. Go ahead. And then our criteria, again, going back to that rubric, does the area request identify a clear plan to determine the impact of the allocation? Does the area indicate a timeline, relevant evaluation method, baseline measurement? So again, all of these are looking at how do we connect back to our program review and how do we make sure that our spending is justified given our plans for the college. Next.
And Lisa, I just wanted to add, I know I mentioned in the previous slide, this is again another prime opportunity to really, really highlight, spotlight, advocate for your requests, as Lisa just walked through with this memo to complement the other form, so you make as compelling a case as possible for resource committee review.
All right, so mostly Daniel here has been talking about things and not about people. We also want to make sure that we are taking a look at the timeline because it follows, but it's a little bit different in terms of how we think about our human resources requests. So this is kind of laid out and it's a little bit tiny, so I'm even having trouble reading it. But we are looking at a May-June submission to request through deans, and moving it along through July. Dean, if you look forward, oop, it went away. There we go. Thank you. He made it a little bit bigger so we can all read it. Very good. In July, deans and supervisors are looking at the documentation. So if you are in an area that is in need of staffing or in need of faculty, those discussions hopefully are happening before folks leave, before faculty in particular are off contract in the spring, because we're looking at that documentation moving forward into August. You can slide that across, Daniel. Into September, we are looking at human resource, the vice presidents are kind of coming together. Sorry, I skipped August because that's an important one. We're talking through dean supervisor level, how do we prioritize those? And then that goes to the vice president's group and then to the resource allocation group for a formal ranking that comes in through recommendations through college council and ultimately the president. So that's kind of the timeline. It's something to keep in mind. And of course, with faculty positions, one of the things that's noteworthy is that we're talking about a whole year in advance, which is why those annual unit plans and the program reviews are so important, because by the time we've gone through this whole process and we're getting recommendations, right? If you look at where this started versus where this ended, now we've got a position for a faculty position. We are now looking at flying that position, usually with announcements going out in December, the hiring process happening between January and April, May, right? And then for a start date of that August. So you can see it's a very long process for faculty positions, which is why we really need to rely on that data and be planning ahead and not caught off guard for the needs as we see the data follow for faculty positions, because we are starting a full, 2 years by the time we're talking about it, all the way till the time, did I get that right? Year and a half, I guess, right? By the time they start. But that is the timeline, and there are kind of two parallel processes happening, one for classified requests and one for faculty requests. And then moving ahead, Daniel. All right, so this kind of breaks it down in a different model, not by timeline, but by where it goes. And so you're going to see, again, we're going to start with how does this align with our program review, our annual unit plans. There we see it in the dean's group prioritizing, and the resource committee, then to college council, finally to the president. So again, you can kind of overlay this with the last slide as far as timeline goes. Ahead. Okay, so let's talk about faculty. Faculty, this is a really interesting one, because I think sometimes there's that sense of, well, wait a minute, why is this position hiring at either an off-cycle time or that wasn't prioritized on this list? We do differentiate at this point in time between retirement positions and new positions. So the human resources request for faculty is going to identify and differentiate those. Occasionally, for example, we'll have an area that's doing a replacement hire for a retirement that happened off cycle. A faculty member, for example, that might retire in December instead of at the end of the academic year. So those might seem to be coming at unusual times. But as many of you know, our kind of typical hiring time is you're going to see those positions for the following year being advertised in December, January for a spring hiring process, which we all know takes a bit of time, for a April-ish, May timeframe for selecting a candidate. And at that point, you know, we're generally looking for board approval either at May or June board meetings, because that's kind of the final step before we could say, okay, we have this new faculty member on board. So our deans really had this process, and they are very much in collaboration and communication with their department chairs and faculty in general to identify, especially for new positions, what is the need, and how does that align with the things that we're seeing in the data of the program review, as well as the narrative of the program review. Go ahead. All right, so that was faculty. Now we'll talk about classified. So again, we have kind of pulled this part out because it's a little bit different. For faculty, you can see there's kind of a clear line, so to speak, right, generally to dean over instruction. And so in those dean's meetings, that's where we initially prioritize and collaborate among deans and areas to make sure that we're being thoughtful and equitable in considering those requests. But classified is a little bit more complex, because you're going to get these classified requests that are in the area of instruction, but are certainly happening in plenty, or even more, in fact, right, in student support services and in other areas on campus, in the VPAS area, really every area. So although you'll see these kind of coming through every VP's areas, at the end of the day, we are still looking at those respective areas. We'll put together their proposal, again, linking it to often to the program reviews associated with that area. There are a few areas, I'll give you a quick example. My office doesn't have a program review, but we have classified staff, right? So occasionally, you know, that won't come necessarily through the director or dean, but it's going to kind of filter up through that vice president's area. And then we're looking at, once they're all sitting together and have been ranked within their respective areas, then they kind of need to be collated, so to speak. And as you can see by this resource request, we're looking at who does that classified person support. Are they supporting students directly? Are they supporting faculty? Are they supporting administration? Why is the position required, right? Some of those things are dictated by our accreditation, sometimes legislation or licensing, depending on the area. But most commonly, we want to make sure that we are supporting our accreditation efforts by providing the adequate and appropriate support for different areas. So this is kind of the form that has been established as a starting point for how do we prioritize these positions. And go ahead and move forward, Daniel. So again, we've got you know, basically, you know, what are we looking at? You'll see these kinds of variables being discussed in the program review. So what is being considered when we start to prioritize our positions with faculty? Again, I know many of you have participated, if you're faculty or an administrator, in program review. So you can see all of the things that are in program review are represented right here. Right? What kinds of things do we need to be considering when we prioritize our faculty positions? It's a little bit different for classified because they're not connected to student headcounts and WISH and FTES and that sort of thing. But we certainly do look at some of the things that are mentioned in the below grid. What kind of support is needed in a particular area? What is the evidence that we have that does show up in program review that suggests that we are not fully or adequately staffed in terms of our classified professionals? And we do also include things like our staffing ratios, as well as what we need to do in terms of accreditation in certain areas. For example, the needs in areas that are career tech, for example, that have additional accrediting bodies may dictate how that area is staffed as well. Thank you. All right, so as we get to the end, and we did want to save some time for any questions or comments, but we're kind of circling back to where you can find additional information. As Susie mentioned, if you popped on late, this recording will be available on the professional development site. And of course, you can reach out to, depending on the nature of your question, the Administrative Services Office. If it pertains to instruction, certainly the Instruction Office or the Program Review Committee. And all of our names are listed there for your contact information. Let's see. Okay, so we have a couple of questions, and I'm gonna defer to any of my colleagues. I certainly don't need to take the lead on these, but we'll pop over to the chat box, and if you, or the Q&A box rather. Keep in mind also that if you look at that Q&A box, there is an answered tab. So some of those questions have been picked up along the way and answered. But if you want to turn your attention there, if you have other questions, that would be the place to put them.
Yes, and I see Dean Smith asked, please explain when a CIF might be needed instead of a FMR. So I want to maybe look at my colleagues. Of course, I know what a FMR is. I'm not sure I know what a CIF is. I'm not sure if any of us do, so we can answer Lorraine's question.
It's a campus improvement form, which
Ah.
we didn't know either. We had to ask Mel.
Great question, Lorraine. That's actually an excellent question that I think needs to get unpacked a little bit more. There is a lot of correlation. The broad answer I will give is that campus improvement forms speak to projects that fall within improvement criterias that would allow us independently on the campus to lead the effort. Whereas a facility modification request typically requires us to engage the district office's construction services team, where we might need architects, we might need specialized third parties for design and construction as would be applicable. But my understanding of my brief tenure is that campus improvement forms speak to smaller projects that are more straightforward, that we can handle independently at the campus level without any hardcore assistance from our district office team. I hope that helps. And I see, oh, go ahead, please.
I can pick up Susan's question because I had to go back to the answered questions to understand your follow-up. Susan's question was about the faculty human resources requests. That was her original question that has been answered, but who fills it out? Who submits it? So these are typically driven by the deans. They should, and typically are very collaborative with their department chairs. So certainly it should be the department chairs and department members that are identifying, their own needs. And again, as you kind of go through program review, right, you start to see, wow, the data suggests that we need another faculty member in this area. That can, the flag can be raised, so to speak, on either side, right? Because the dean is also reading those program reviews and saying, hey, typically, I'll be honest, typically it's pretty well known if you need a faculty member, as you're doing program review, right? It's as you go to your own classes and you see wait lists and you see, whatever those indicators are, you typically know, but the data backs it up. And that's what we want to be able to see. So that should be a collaborative conversation between the dean and the department, but it is submitted by the dean. And they can certainly share in the writing. I often do see deans take the lead on this, but they are certainly not without their faculty members. But at the end of the day, the hit submit button that you're asking about, Susan, is the dean. And they will bring those. One of the things that I've been very pleased about is that our deans have been very collaborative in recognizing that while they are looking to advocate for their own division, as they should, they also recognize the bigger picture that, at the end of the day, every area has needs and that we have to prioritize accordingly. So that's where those will come through. But that is the submit button to answer the short The short follow-up question is from the dean.
Daniel, or maybe Kirsten, Susan had a question going back to the resource request rubric. You want to head back to that slide? It was near the beginning. She wants to know examples of what the criteria back.
So
No, it's fine. Yeah. The next one.
the next one.
Oh, no, it's the
Forward.
rubric.
It's the rubric. What would be examples of the three? So what would be a low example? What would be a moderate? What would be a strong example?
So I'll maybe start with an example. If you had, for example, a request for a modification of your facility that you wanted to remodel an area with some furniture, some paint, and you think it'll cost $50,000. Now, if you fill out a form and just with those basic elements, in that example, you probably wouldn't get a lot of points, if you will. But if you go a little bit deeper, if you have quotes associated with, some of these different program scope elements, if you have an estimate of cost, if you've completed a facility modification request as applicable, or the campus improvement form, as Lorraine asked the question about earlier. And then also, like we were showing in the presentation with the justification request memo and the resource request form, really do your best to answer some of these items, like we gave examples of with the FPCA item. That is going to, dependent on the level of granularity, get you from the none, as the base example I gave, all the way up to strong, depending on the level of detail. And Kirsten, not sure you have a additional and alternative perspective on that question from your side.
No, I think you answered it really well. I didn't have a specific example. I was just thinking more generally, like what would cause a lower ranking versus a higher ranking in terms of like timeline and whatnot. The only thing that I would add is that, and of course I can't think of an example right now, but maybe I will as we continue to talk. Might be ways in which there are certain areas of the prompt that don't explicitly connect to the resource that's being requested. I'm thinking specifically in terms of evaluation, like in the area of the timeline, baseline measurement, that type of thing. Sometimes we request things that we can identify a timeline that we'd like to receive those resources by in order to achieve that particular goal. But the measurement of impact is the achievement, like the receiving of the resources, being able to provide something, being able to, like, if it's getting resources for a kiln, right? The achievement is the kiln. So some of these are not explicitly linked to being able to rank low, moderate, high. What we're trying to do with this rubric when we initially developed it was to give people a sense of, here are some of the things that we're looking for when we're evaluating these resource requests. But obviously, we understand that there might be ways in which programs may not be able to address that particular thing. And that's really what that justification memo is about. So Daniel was talking about, that's the space to advocate. So really let the folks who are reviewing this understand the need for the resource and how it's connected to your goals. So even if we can't have a specific ranking in one particular area, we have a broad understanding of it.
And then Shirley had a question regarding the relationship between program review and resource requests. Kirsten, you want to just read your answer?
So program review, I'm trying to find my answer really quickly. So, okay, in program review, when the committee supports a instructional program review or a service unit review, The committee is supporting the analysis, the connection that the writers have made between the goals and the potential resources that they might need. But the committee isn't seeing very specific details about the resources. So the committee isn't approving resources or just kind of saying, these are good goals based on what you've written in your document, and we think that these would be resources to help you achieve those goals. And that's kind of where the committee, is in terms of that. And so then Shirley was asking what would be attached to the resource request. And I would actually defer to Daniel and Lisa on this. My perspective was that I don't necessarily think the program review or the annual unit plan would need to be, because not so much the annual unit plan right now, but the program review is a public document. So really, if the committee had questions about how the resource connected to the program review, the committee could easily access that. And I sit on the committee to be like a resource for those things. So I don't know that those need to be attached, but I was deferring to the two of you in terms of specific process, because I don't do those rankings. So I don't know if you are actually looking for program review being attached to those.
I definitely want to tee up Lisa for her thoughts, but what I always say is there's no such thing as, in cases like this, too much information. Now, I'm not, encouraging, an end drive, and construction documents, et cetera, if applicable. But again, what I always encourage people to do, like we said during the presentation, think that what you submit should be clear, concise, evident. So with you as the requester not being at the table to advocate for your submission at the time, it, within reason, covers all the requisite bases based off of the rubric that we're looking at, so that a committee member who has no real expertise associated with the request that's been submitted can get a quality perspective to make an informed decision and score it accordingly. Lisa, not sure you have a different take on that.
The only thing I will add to that is, since Shirley's question was specifically about program review, and then fast forward, now we've got this resource request. In the justification, it's certainly worthwhile to include there those key elements of the program review that support that resource request, right? So it is that connection that, as the committee's seeing this, and again, as Daniel said, they're seeing it absent of necessarily being part of program review or seeing that document. So the justification request, the justification for the resource request, it would do you well, right, to reference back to how this has been represented in program review and supported in program review. And then, of course, as you all know and was already mentioned, you're going to want to make sure that that quotes, and particularly technology and FMRs, right, are considered on the front end, right? Not only in terms of our best estimates of cost, but also in terms of just the fact that we've had those collaborations, right? Because technology, I'm thinking specifically in particular, right, often means we may need more staffing, which is not the request, but it's a result of the request, right? And it's got to be considered. So that early reach out to our technology folks and as much detail in the FMRs as is reasonably possible are the kind of important attachments to that request.
And I just wanted to chime in. The overall goal is to get as much of this together in one place as possible. I know CurricuNet has been a challenge, but this includes your annual unit plans. Everything should go together holistically so that we're really starting to do long-term planning rather than emergency planning or, I want to do this right now. If we do it correctly, it'll take a while, but we'll all know the process and it'll be transparent. And hopefully it'll feel more fair than, oh, why did they get this or that? It's all part of a process, and we can make sure everyone is resourced appropriately. So.
Thank you, Alex, for saying that, because again, the whole goal of today and really, kind of trying to pin down this model. Yes, there are a lot of these pieces are for accreditation and for alignment with our educational master plan and all of those things. Well, we're also really trying to create a transparent process. So hence this workshop today, as well as making these documents widely available. But again, I'll harken back to something I said before, just to reiterate that oftentimes when you see things, either purchase requests or personnel that seem off cycle or seem not to have followed this process, I do think it's important to really understand that this process is really referencing our general fund, right? So there are things that will align with our bond, and there are things that will align with categorical funding that don't follow these rules, to be just perfectly candid, right? Sometimes we've written a grant and it calls for a particular position. And for example, a categorically funded classified position that you will not necessarily see go through this entire cycle. And that's because that's what we've committed to under the expectations of the grant.
And I would just add, just to talk about timing and total cost of ownership. I gave a example a little earlier about, hey, a remodel project that, we think will cost $50,000. Well, sometimes going through the facility modification request process, more due diligence is done, and it ends up being determined that, hey, to do this, we might have to not rent it, but we might have to remodel the area, which might have to require procuring, onboarding a third-party architect. It might trigger a triple letter acronym, DSA review, which is the Department of State Architecture, which, dependent on the request type and also what's involved in the DSA's capacity, that could add many months, in some cases more than a year. Why do I reference that? In sometimes requests, there's a thing called escalation costs, where, hey, here in May 2025, it might be $50,000. But when we do that level of analysis and we see, hey, this might take from here 13 months to get done. And that might make the actual cost, factoring in contingencies, soft cost, third parties, it might take it closer to $100,000 or more. That is a completely different analysis for a $103,000 project request that'll take, 13 months, maybe more to do, versus the $50,000 one that was thought to be a 30, 60, 90-day item. So this is why we want to make sure we do what we can to kick the tires a little bit, to make sure we have a clear understanding of scope, schedule, cost, and also how that aligns to the rubric for analysis, to make sure we're making informed decision as best possible with organizational resources.
I noted Tim's question in the chat box, which is probably most appropriate for you, Daniel, although it looks accurate to me, but I want to not overstep. Daniel, that's probably a good question for you.
All right, let me read it out for Mr. Woods. Is it accurate to think that the resource committee would be focused on bigger strategic requests, such as creating a new computer lab or other specialized instructional space? Routine maintenance would not be part of this process. For example, admin services had a schedule of all office spaces with a timeline for carpet replacement and painting work to be done. Other needs, such as classroom furniture replacement, would seem to fall under CIF process, correct? Tim, I think you're more than the ballpark, sir. There is a different process for routine maintenance items and, kind of the systematic scheduled replacements that might be encompassed in other resource allocation models apart from the resource requests. And this is a great platform for what your initial question was: more strategic, larger programmatic service or larger equipment items that might require some integration considerations on a one-time basis or multi-year, multi-phase basis. So I think you're in the ballpark with your inquiry, sir, and I appreciate the question.
Okay, we are at time, but we do have one question that Alex answered in the Q&A, but I want to get it on the recording. Gurminder asked, if you could go back a slide, Daniel, to the planning One more. Planning process. G asks where can we find the leading indicators for each of these steps? And Alex is left, but he answered, we don't specifically have indicators associated with each step because we need to revisit this graphic. This relates, our indicators relate more to our old planning process, but generally our leading indicators are completion of math and English, number of units accumulated, course success rate, semester to semester persistence, like that. Okay, that is the end. I'm dropping the link to the professional development at Fresno City College YouTube channel. If you got in late or you want to share this information with your colleagues, direct them there. I'll have the recording up hopefully early next week. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to complete the evaluation that will should pop up when you close the Zoom. We thank you all for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you to our interpreters, Stephen and Andrew.
I was just going to say that. Thank you to our interpreters and thank you, Susie.